Whoa, we have announcements that we're recording in progress. Is that new?
I think they changed it recently in Zoom.
Let me finish getting my coffee. I'll be right back. Curious how many people have stocked up their fancy coffee machines and juice makers and decaffeinators at home over this COVID thing. Shit. And spill coffee.
Been the same the whole time with my little tea from the grocery store. Nothing fancy.
All right,
but
let's see here.
Remote before everybody was remote.
Was what? Before? Oh, yeah.
I was remote before everybody else was remote, so.
You were remote before it was cool. I wonder if people call it cool now. I just want to go back to an office. All right, let's get the template going here. We're waiting for Milind. He had some updates. Oh, somebody already did that. Thank you.
And Marina had a few items on there too.
Okay. Attendees, agenda, notes. Okay, I was what was missing. And let me just ping one to make sure he's actually coming. What did he last say on that? Did he say he was coming or not?
Looks like we got Marina. It is kind of an awkward week for people. I think a lot of people took this one off.
Yeah, I was debating on canceling today, but I figured we canceled last week, and we have been making progress.
Yeah,
just not the same pace. Then people, some of the AWS folks were on call this week, and Shiwei was on call this week from Azure. So,
yeah, I was hoping OCI wouldn't cancel, but fortunately they did.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, there you are. Great. I lost track whether you said you were coming or not. Sorry.
Yeah, just a bit late. Oh, was there any question for me?
Did you have something you wanted to? I thought you had something in one of the docs you wanted to present today.
No, I just had on the agenda. I just put some. I'll give some status updates and what we are thinking of picking up next.
Okay, great. Oh, I see it now. Okay. All right. Actually, wait, I thought I saw.
Say, probably give another minute and then have Marina go through hers.
Yeah, Mila, were you going to propose another time slot? Am I forgetting who that was?
No, that wasn't me.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Marina, why don't you go ahead? I was just trying to give folks a chance to join, and I thought I saw.
Wait, no worries. Let's give people the 5 minutes.
Okay.
All right, so this is just, these are both, did I put one or two of them in here? Yeah, these are just a couple of the catch-ups from the documents we've been talking about. I think there are some comments on one of these this morning that I didn't get a chance to look at yet, but I figure we can just go over them briefly and then maybe update accordingly. Let's see. Really the biggest thing here is just to see if there's any other blockers for getting this stuff started to get merged in as we can start figuring out kind of the key revocation, what kind of our goals are for this going forward. And I also want to talk about how we can combine this with some of the other key management work that's happening, because I think it feels like we're doing kind of some separate streams when I think maybe we could be collaborating a little bit more cohesively to come up with a strategy for this going forward. Because I feel like I don't really know all the work that's going on these pieces, but
yeah, on the other pieces, I'll talk about it in my update. So for the revocation PR, I left some comments. You responded on it. I think the next step is probably if I can take my content and create a merge PR, then we can review the combined version. I think that should be good to push. That's
okay, so yeah, what if we aim to like merge this in and then kind of merge in some updates to it, just to kind of, make it easy for people to find what's going on.
I think that's been the conversation we've been having this week, is how can we get these merged? Because we basically took what's in 47 and we shifted to that hack doc, and that's where most of the conversations have been happening. And then how do we, like the conversation, do we close 47 and just open, propose the other one? And we didn't want to lose the history that we have in here. So then can we do a PR on top of this? I
kind of disagree. I feel like they're just like parallel efforts. I think a lot of the stuff that's in 47 isn't in there and vice versa. So it would be nice to get all of that content into one document, but I just don't know if that's the way to do that. And this one's already in GitHub.
My preference is to definitely merge this now and then iterate on top of that. I think these are new files, right? So we're adding new content that we don't have already there before. We're not breaking anything. And so it's better than what's already in the repo. So merge it and then iterate on top of that.
There are conflicts though in the content that's in the one Milin's been working on, though, in the sense that I don't think we want to have separate documents, I think, is the end result.
I agree, but, I think that go ahead.
I was probably going to say the same thing you were, which is I think the way we merge these is that we first merge 47 and then Milin does another PR on top of these files with the new content that he wants to add.
Milin, do you want to speak to what you want to do there?
I think that's like the GitHub workflow usually. So
I think we can do it that way. I think the general kind of overall feedback on this document, I think I didn't capture it in a specific comment, was to, like, for example, there are references to TUF here, like holistic key revocation approach and TUF. Just wanted to know, like, are we basing, like some of this is new work, right? And we are thinking about this fresh. So should we be referring to Notary V1 or TUF terminology here? And I think that will also help me when I merge content.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think I always had the same kind of thought when we were looking at the other document and the OSCP stuff, and whether we want to build on these existing things or kind of not tie it to any existing technologies. But I think that referring to things that already are working, like the OSCP and like the TUF, does make sense.
And I think we've done a good job in this document of not calling out TUF all over the place. And we just have one reference to the very top.
I agree. I think that sounds fine. If our position is that we are referencing these as examples of how things are done, and that's not really dictating what the final solution is. These are, the way I see it, these are like a more detailed requirements and potential approaches document, and we still have to do detailed design work. I'm okay if we have that stand that we can reference different technologies and we'll come up with a recommendation, and the design is where we'll really flesh things out.
I mean, I think the document itself here in this 47 that we're looking at covers a number of the things that we want to merge into the other one. The sentence at the bottom of the screen there specifically says, like, this is around the approach to key revocation in TUF. If we can get rid of that sentence, then I think it's easy to merge the two together, because we're we're starting here from a fresh start of requirements of what we're trying to achieve of revocation, and we're not trying to start with the solution. I think that's been the key piece that's helped us move forward with what we want to accomplish in a decentralized content movement scenario versus some of the stuff that was originally done where there was one registry concept.
Yeah, I think we can definitely update that first section to kind of reframe the document a bit. But I think the sections, like the content sections, are pretty much just general approaches
those are great.
to notation. Yeah. So I think it's just a matter of framing, which is important. But yeah, that can be changed. All right.
Yeah.
So
one of the reasons I'm so strongly trying to get this one merged, just kind of address some of the comments, is that I think this really raises the question that we need to answer before we start moving too far ahead with everything else. I think we've got a lot of parallel efforts, and some people have jumped off and run straight into implementation where we still have questions about what do we want to implement.
I want to be careful with that because I know that there's been some discussion around that. We discussed very early on that we wanted to do a very iterative approach to take what we know and build upon it. Like this was the Gaudi example of building models, taking what we know, putting things together, because we were so caught up in the beginning of people talking past each other that by building these prototypes, it has helped us facilitate the conversations that we're at now. So yeah, I just want to be careful of that, of any, that there's all these parallel efforts.
I just worry that people will get caught up in the effort that they're working on, and it'll be hard to then change stuff that's already written in code. That would be my concern there, because I agree that it's nice to look at prototypes and see how this stuff works in practice, because words on paper are words, code is real. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't be afraid to delete code that already exists if we decide on an approach.
I completely agree. I think people are assuming what might have other projects have done maybe, and I don't want to comment on what others have or haven't done. Here we've been super careful to state that all the time. Like I've had conversations with the folks that there's no concept of breaking changes because there's no commitment that we won't. Like NV Prototype 1 had nothing. Prototype 2 definitely built on Prototype 1, but there was no compatibility. What we do after Prototype 2 as we merge in the main, no compatibility. Now, once we start shipping something this fall, we have to have some, I don't want to say compatibility. We have to know that what the content is. And I'm just going to do a quick tangent on this. As we start persisting content in registries, we need to know later when that content's pulled out, because that content will live, quote, forever. We never know when that'll go away. So that's the extent of it. I don't even want to say it's compatible. There's just a version on it. So we know when we actually get to the thing that we'll do next year, how to read what we learned this year out of the registries.
Yeah, I think that
we'll iterate quite quickly.
But yeah, that's where I think it's critical that we have these security properties defined before we make any commitments to a 1.0. Because at that point, it becomes really, really hard to add security without breaking changes, or even add security to something that hasn't been designed with it in mind, which is, I think, what we're already trying to do. So yeah, that's just going to be really challenging. And I want to make sure that these documents are all defined and included, because otherwise I don't think we'll actually have a secure distribution system. We'll just have a distribution system. So
can you identify where we've designed something that doesn't have security?
It's tricky because security is it's the whole ecosystem. It's end to end. It's making sure that every single piece is well defined. And if we don't have, for example, revocation built in yet, we have to make sure that that is actually compatible and built into the code, because otherwise we don't have those properties.
Agreed. But that's what Melinda's been driving, was the whole revocation scenarios.
No, I totally agree. I just think that until it's in the code, we can't claim the code has those properties. That's all I'm saying.
Agreed. No, I totally agree. Totally agree. When we start saying we're designing and we're executing without certain principles, like we are definitely taking a layered approach. We wrote clearly what we want to do in Prototype 1 and Prototype 2. And after Prototype 2, we needed to flush those things out. Like we made a lot of progress with the registry persistent stuff. And we needed that stuff to figure that out. Now that we're getting closer, and I think we're at the point of, we're basically debating how do we merge the revocation documents that we've been working with this. And then Milind has the next round of stuff that he wants to work on taking the signature format that we've been working on, for instance. So I want to make sure that we're just not making statements that we're doing stuff without other things when we've been clear on we are doing this layered approach so that we continue to learn.
All right. Well, I think, yeah, that makes sense. I think we can keep working on the technical details for now. I think that's the best way to move this forward.
Okay. So to the point of the merger of this, if we can just update that first paragraph to be more generic, and then, yeah, we can merge that in. And then, you know, Milind, if you can, I think the challenge is, Milind, where you said you were going on to on-call, or I forget what you guys call it. So is it NIAS or, I'm sorry?
Yeah, it's me. I'm on call this week and the next. So my availability is a bit limited.
Is there any chance I could help out with that effort as well? I think there's a lot of people here who could help out with that as well. I'd be happy to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, we have the revocation doc in Hack Docs. I read through your content, saw where things overlap. I think the allow list, deny list is where things overlap. I think your final recommendation is where it's a bit different than what I propose. And the doc that I have has a lot of additional context setting and terminology, etc. that merges in cleanly. I think there are a few sections that are tricky, but I think a lot of sections are pretty straightforward to merge. And there's overlapping content on allow list, deny list that I can combine the content. I think I'll take a stab at it. I've already thought about how it would be merged.
Sounds great. I'll be happy to review that or whatever this week. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Marina, what do you think about doing a PR against your branch?
That would work too. I'm good with either way. I just think that I want to make sure that it's discoverable, and I don't, whatever the process that makes that the easiest. My thought was that it would make it more discoverable if we just merge and have more PRs on the main repo so that people can see those PRs on the main repo, but I don't mind reviewing them on my branch either if people think that's an easier way to see them.
I think looking at all options, I would prefer if we made a little bit of the changes that Steve was proposing, merge your version and then I do the version on top.
I think that makes sense.
I looked into like how we can do the merge PR. I think that's going to be more tricky and time consuming.
I'd lean toward doing everything straight on the Notary project repo and not moving things out into other repos just for discoverability for the community.
Okay, so Marina, can you make those changes? And then Milind, can you work? The thing I'm worried about is I don't want to go 2 weeks with a gap. So if we can do the second merge, like get Marina's merge in and get the doc that Milind's group and Melinda group have been working on merge quickly, then I think we'll be in good shape. The sensitivity is this: we've been very careful about what we put in main. Like all the prototypes, to your point, like those are often branches. There's nothing in a main branch that has any statement of commitment. And we've had opposite feedback, like, hey, I don't really understand what's doing because these main branches are empty. So we did say that after prototype 2, all the work will go into main. Not, obviously the merges will go into main and they will iterate. Like we're going to merge stuff into main that the next round of merges will break the previous thing. And we'll have to figure out how to label things until we get to whatever the stability we want for this fall. Same thing for the docs. So if we can get the 2 in quickly, then I think we'll be in great shape.
I mean, if
you said you had like a bunch of other docs you wanted to get to, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, if the concern is that how we are treating main and how that content is being viewed publicly, we can always create a branch and submit these work in progress content into that branch and to do PRs on top of it. And finally, when everybody is good with that, we can merge it into main. That works. Yeah, and I think also, that works too, and that's discoverable too.
I was careful to put it in a document that's not called, you know, final specification.md or anything, just to make it clear that these are just considerations as well. And like, you know, because there's even not even a conclusion really in this document. It's just options and things. So
yeah, I'm
And that
open to
was-
either approach. I'm new here, so I'm not sure what the overall protocol or status of the repository is.
And I do think that Marina's last point there was a big one, which is that there is no conclusion drawn from this. It was put out there for the community to look at, to see the different options, and then we could go out and make a decision on it. So I think there's value of getting it committed without saying we're making any commitment, because there is nothing we're committing to in there.
I think that's
so let's do that. Let's do the two-phased. Just because we're 20 after. I know Melinda, you had, well, I think Marina, you had another topic, and Melinda wanted to tee up the other docs that he's working on.
yeah, so my other one is hopefully quick as well. We'll see what happens. It's just this other PR that's been sitting for a minute. I wanted to make sure we revisited a couple of these new scenarios for key discovery and stuff like that, just to make sure that we you know, have the scenarios well defined. There's a lot of comments in here, some of them for this morning or last night, I guess, that I didn't have a chance to to take a look at, but and I will go through those, but I just want to make sure to get some eyes on this as well, discuss here. I think that
we
found
want to
this,
do the read thing, because to be fair, I haven't kept up with this one yet.
Yeah, it's been, I think, a couple of weeks, so we can definitely give people some time to look at it if you would like.
Yeah, Marina, what's your thought on splitting this into a couple PRs and having one scenario
you had
each?
that comment before, and I think that's totally doable. Maybe make them merge faster. I just hadn't done it out of, you know, I hadn't gotten to it, so but I could totally do that.
I know the document's kind of a pain in the butt to do it that way, just because the numbering gets thrown off and you have to figure out what order these things are going to get merged in. But
yeah,
I think at least some of the stuff up in the beginning, it does make sense to just, there's little question around, just get it merged and make it happen. So
yeah, I think especially scenario 10, I feel like there was not much, well, I haven't read again the new comments, but there, earlier at least there wasn't much controversy there. But yeah, we'll see.
I mean, to our point of breaking changes, I don't know if it matters the numbers change until we get, you know, like something official.
It's just dealing with like merge conflicts. If you throw two things in the same spot in the document, then you have to resolve the conflict after one of them gets merged.
Yeah, it's not like hard, it's just another thing to do.
I'm trying to remember, honestly, because when I see a key discovery, I think of the stuff we talked about is where do you get the public keys, and we don't want them in the registries.
So are we going to read? Are we going to read, or are we going to talk about it? Sorry.
No, that's great. And so what else do we have on the agenda, just to make sure? Is it, Melinda, it's just your update on design documents? Because if so, we have time to read and go into this one.
Yeah, we can read one scenario at a time. Maybe give like 5 minutes to read the first one and then chat and go from there.
Yeah, I think that works. I'll need about 10 minutes at the end.
I appreciate Melinda's honesty on this digesting of the content. All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Sorry, just question point of order. Are we reading just 10 is what we're proposing here?
That's what I was thinking, just go one at a time. We can probably end sooner if people are done.
Just because this is basically edits to the scenarios doc. So scenario 10 changes are fairly finite. So I don't want people to feel like they have to go off the whole thing.
All right, anyone need more time to read the first scenario? All right, I think it's pretty short. I think I'll just, I don't know if there's any controversy here. I think that it looks like Miroslav kind of said basically what I would have said here as well about the different keys being trusted for different things.
Yeah, looking at that, I might be just nitpicking over the wording, but I don't think there's a real disagreement. The multiple key scenario is described later anyway, in more detail.
Yeah, I think I could maybe clarify it a bit, but I think I agree with basically what you're saying. So,
could you refresh the page I put in a comment? And I had some questions. I'm not still sure what it's trying to convey.
Yeah.
So again, this is for my understanding as well. So when you consume artifacts, you are specifying what you pull, and you do that by providing a URL and either a tag or a digest. So that specifies the what or the product,
yes.
Right? And that, along with the trusted keys, that is the information that you need. It seemed to imply, and that's where I started commenting, that the user has to give some kind of mapping, like for this product, trust this key. Is that what we are proposing? Or maybe that's too detailed, and the content needs to be generic.
So I don't know what it doesn't need to be necessarily like a one-to-one mapping, but I think definitely limiting the scope of the keys is kind of the goal here, to say that this key from this company should definitely be used for all of this company's packages, but I don't necessarily trust it to sign, some arbitrary other packages that somebody else should be signing.
I think this is a client consideration. If you want to write a client that specifies the exact key with a single repo on every pool, and you have a database somewhere else and call that client with a single key, you can do that. I think many will find it practical to have some kind of permanent trust policy that is long-term and that is not explicitly invoked on every container image, so that you can decide the policy once a month or something and install it in the cluster. And in the pods, you can just name images without worrying about keys at all. But that's just an UI aspect to me.
And I think you could definitely say like this key is trusted for star or something like that, if you didn't want to do this kind of fine-grained piece. But I think it's definitely important for people who know what keys should be used for what, that they're able to specify that. To prevent things
so
like
I think I'm missing something a little bit. Like if, and maybe this is part of the conversation of what was done in one where you could put a key for a whole repo. Like if I take, an image, the netmonitor, we'll just keep on using the netmonitor image, and I put netmonitor V1 out there and it's on digest A, and I sign that with key K1. Let's just, trying to keep something relatively simple. And then later on, I decide that for whatever reason, I want to switch to key 2. So now I put netmonitor V2 out there with digest B, and I sign it with key 2. When I go to validate those, either I have to, and maybe there's a root key for all of Wabbit networks or whatever, but maybe that's what you're referring to the star. But I'm confused a little bit on, as long as the key matches the specific artifact I'm pulling, isn't that what we're trying to say, or we're trying to say something broader than that?
The key piece is that specific artifact piece. So basically all this is saying is that you don't just have a pool of trusted keys, you have images, and generally what keys are supposed to be used to sign them. And this just lets a user define that, say, so that the user is allowed to specify, I trust these keys to sign these artifacts.
Sign or validate?
Yeah. Oh, well, both. I will validate artifacts that have been signed with this key. So would be I think the correct way to say that.
I didn't understand the scope part of it. What you mentioned, the key should be scoped. What do we scope it to?
Oh, to artifacts. I think maybe there's a clearer word for that. I definitely welcome wording changes.
But if we say, so if we say artifact, like how do you specify the artifact?
That's going to be client specific.
Yeah.
An artifact is signed with a specific key, K1, let's just say. I'm trying to get the delegations out because that makes my head hurt sometimes. So let's just say that the netmonitor V1 is signed with K1. If netmonitor V2 is signed with K2, then if I try to, and I pull netmonitor V1, I have to use the K1 key. If I pull netmonitor V2 and I only have the K1 key, I can't validate V2 because for whatever reason, Wabbit Networks decided to switch keys, and that's not the current key I have.
Well, if there's no delegation, then a human must be involved because that's not distinguishable from an attack when the key 2 comes from an attacker.
Yeah, I think in that attack scenarios, I think the bigger one I was thinking of is like, if I have a key and I'm trusted to sign Wabbit Networks, that doesn't necessarily mean that you want me signing Network Monitor, right? Because I might want Network Monitors to just link you directly back to Wabbit Networks, because I think everyone should just always run Wabbit Networks, or something actually malicious could actually happen as well.
Well, that's what I was trying to use. Wabbit Networks is intentionally, it's supposed to be the small nebulous company nobody heard of. Like that's what we like about that scenario, because you have to use Docker Hub to kind of validate it, so to speak. Whereas if you take something like Microsoft is almost too big. And maybe we do use one key for the whole thing, but my thought was, and this is where I need Ian and others to kind of weigh in, like .NET probably would use something separate because you would validate that separately from what would you do with Dynamic CRM or the entire Office suite. But maybe there's a root signature for all of Microsoft.
I think the granularity is going to be, the granularity is going to be decided per use case, and it's going to be a client-side decision. I think what we're putting here is that there just needs to be the ability to have that granularity. And yeah, exactly. I think most of us agree that that's a need.
Yeah, this to me reads like it's a client requirement, right? That whatever clients we build for Notary V2 should have the ability to, specify a key or a set of keys.
And how you specify that, whether that's
we launch a container.
Yeah, and how you specify that, whether that's going down to individual tags or individual repositories or a whole namespace within a repository, that's up to us to decide when we start writing the clients. But it's just, I think we're noting here that needs to be a capability that we should include at the client side.
I think the part I'm not able to connect is when you pull any artifact now, like as an example, like Kubernetes pod specification or AWS ECS task definition, you provide a bunch of in my pod for the multiple images artifacts that I'm consuming, this is where you pull from by tag or by digest. So that is one piece of metadata that is used. And now we are adding like a trust policy, which says trust these keys. The way it is written now seems to imply that as part of that trust configuration, we need to provide a mapping between keys and artifact in some form. And that is the part I'm not understanding why we have a need
Yeah,
for that.
I would say yes, that's something that we do need. So let me throw a scenario out, and then I'm cutting Marina off too much, so I'm going to let her jump in after
it's okay.
this.
No, but don't worry about it. Sorry.
But I would say if I pull down the key for ECS because I want to run an AWS image out there, and I, as a user out or running containers within the AWS infrastructure, I may also want to say that here's the key for a Docker Hub to pull down the official Docker Hub images. And if suddenly I start pulling down the Docker Hub images and they're signed by Amazon, I might not want that. I might want to say, you know what, I don't trust them signing these images. I trusted Docker signing these images. And so I just want to verify that source key. And so I think we just need a way at the client side to do that. And so we're just saying that just needs to be a capability here. Are we describing that right?
Yeah, and I think that this kind of jives with scenario 11, which I know we haven't gotten to, but the idea being that both the client needs a way to specify this themselves so that they can define this per artifact if they so choose. And then scenario 11 goes into what about the clients that don't want to have this level of granularity? And if they just want to use default options without any setup ability, maybe this is for, you know, testing scenarios for smaller development, something like that. Which I know I haven't given people a chance to read this yet, but.
I was kind of hearing Melin's. Go ahead. Just to phrase it, I think what Melind, you were, and this is why it goes back to the original thing. If everybody's got their expertise they're bringing, I think Melind, you're kind of going the next step of thinking, how do I deal with this? Where I think Marina's just saying, here's the rudest, the most granular piece of it, and because it's so granular, there does need to be some kind of mapping, which I think comes later.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine. I don't fully understand it yet, but I think when we flesh out the trust policies, we'll get into this discussion anyway. Yeah, I'm good if this has been a consideration that we have already discussed in the past, and most of us agree it should be there.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to try to keep a tick list of what will get done, are we good that 10 as updated can merge?
I would say yes. I think what was missing in the scenarios before is there was no mention of those policies in the scenarios before, Melind. And so this is the first time we mentioned that there needs to be something that gives you the ability to have a policy.
Got it. Okay.
All right, so scenario 11. A lot of comments here as well, but I'll give people a couple minutes. Folks need more time this time? I wrote it, so not a very good judge of how long it takes to read. So just let me know.
Sorry, Marina. What was I heard birds chirping.
Oh, sorry. I was just asking if anyone needs more time. I wrote it, so it's hard for me to judge the reading time.
I think yours is straightforward. I was actually trying to digest the commentary on it.
Yeah, don't dig too deep into the picture there. It's more just kind of me getting that written out, sketched out before I forgot it.
I think I'm good. Probably want to refresh to get new comments.
Yes, for sure. I'm sure people added notes. Yeah, so the difference between here and the previous one is the other one, the client is defining keys for artifacts, whereas in this one, you're letting like the registry or some default method just chain from a root and automatically determine the keys for the artifact. So this lets you kind of have less work on the client side at the cost of a little bit more trust of the registry to provide those kind of keys.
What does that mean though? Because like one of the things we've said is the registries are kind of just dumb storage buckets that have learned to know about relationships, but the fact that it's storing signatures is almost, it's just opaque to it. So I'm trying to understand whether or not this transfer back to.
Whether or not they're stored on the registry, I think is kind of an implementation question that I don't want to get into too much here. But I think the basic idea is that if someone just opens Docker or whatever for the first time and wants to install an image, there should be a way for them to verify the signature on that image using a key that they know is trusted based on information available to them without having to do the manual configuration from scenario 10.
I think that's
trying to understand how that wouldn't work already.
Tofu thing that we've been debating about. So like, in fact, the way you said that actually is an interesting one. So if I use the Docker client, the assumption we've been making is the Docker client would probably have the key for Docker Hub. So anything that Docker signs, and like if you don't trust Wabbit Networks, you never heard of them, but because Wabbit Networks arranged with Docker to become certified content, then Docker would sign it. Be like, well, I trust stuff from Docker, so that's okay. Now, let's say Wabbit Networks before that is on Docker Hub, just like every other person that you don't necessarily trust, and you decide, I really like this product, I like this project, I like this content. Somehow, total hand waving right now, probably on the description page for this is the best we've got right now, it says, hey, if you like this content, this is where you get the public key. And I go get that public key, which is just as trustworthy as the content itself, and I could configure my client to pull from it.
Exactly, and then you can configure. Yeah, then you can configure that either as like a scenario 10. Okay, so yeah, I trust Wabbit Networks for this stuff. I'm going to put that key in there because now I know I trust it. Versus in scenario 11, you're just saying, Docker is trusted by default. I'm just going to, download anything signed by people, signed by Docker. And that is exactly the kind of gradations of control that I think people need. Either a semi-default, it has a signature. This matches what's on the repository. I don't know too much about it. Or the more fine-grained, oh, I actually know this company. I like their stuff. Here's their key. I'm going to make sure to use it in my actual systems.
So with the description you put out there, do we need a scenario 11, or would you just have a scenario 10 where you say, here is this default key that Docker uses to sign all kinds of stuff with. Let me just trust this across star.
Yeah, scenario 11, I think is I added based on concerns about the ability for especially like smaller kind of open source projects to really have the fine-grained degradations needed for, fine-grained control needed for scenario 10. If we think that this isn't needed, then every person will want to configure on the client side their trusted keys. I think that would be fine. But if we think that people will want a more default method of just saying, okay, I have these root keys, use that to find packages. That's what scenario 11 is designed for.
I kind of agree with
Brandon. Go ahead, Bill.
I kind of think that large scale defaults imply some kind of CA or delegation, because otherwise the default Docker key would just be signed in way too much and be available in too many machines to scale, and it would be hard to protect it. So for us, that implies that we need some way to create and validate certificates, not just simple signatures like in scenario 10.
Yeah, I think that the delegations would definitely have to be part of the implementation of this. Kind of, I think that this diagram here, there's some illustration of that. So one way you could do that.
Yeah. It is a method, not the method. But I kind of go back to, are we saying this is just, we need a way to do a chain of trust with the certificates? And I think we've got a lot of solutions for that today already when you look at like web servers and whatnot, how they communicate, here's my certificate.
Yeah, and this is just saying that that should be an option for people to use. Yeah.
I think
in a concrete scenario, because I'm trying to still struggle a little bit. So let's just use the what we said before: Web Networks, small company, nobody knows who they are, but they did go through the Docker certification program. So you trust Docker. So by default, you wind up trusting. You're actually still not trusting Web Networks key. You're trusting Docker's key because Docker has its own key that it signs. So basically, when I pull the net monitor image, it actually has two keys on it. Now I'll pick on Brandon because I can see him. Brandon has got a project, the B project, and he posts something to Docker Hub. He doesn't go through the Docker certification. At this point, there's no way to trust his content unless you download his key and trust his content. Is that what we're saying here? Or is there some other magic thing because it was on Docker Hub that it has some kind of key?
So what this is saying is that if you want to have kind of scenario 10 trust, then yes, you should download his key and use that like that. What scenario 11 is saying is that Docker can have the Docker certified images and then other images on Docker. And the other images on Docker can still be signed. And those keys delegated from a separate Docker key saying, you know, we haven't validated these keys. We don't know these packages, but if you want to make sure that you're downloading something that matches what we have, whether or not that's good, this is something that you should verify it against.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not really thinking you wait until whether that's a valid scenario. You're just saying that basically Docker has two keys. One this is the actual certified content, and there's weight to that, and then there's other random stuff on Docker Hub that, for whatever reason, has a key, and you know, like in fact, the Docker client may not even have that key by default. I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the value of having that key versus it's not unsigned by anything trusted.
So it prevents things like man-in-the-middle attacks and rollback attacks and that kind of thing. You can get that kind of protection even without the whole entire trust chain being known. And I think Brandon has his hand up.
So uncertified content versus certified content, wherever they decide to name it.
I would kind of push against the assumption of certified content. Signature doesn't imply any specific fitness for purpose. So if you have web networks and you've never heard of them, you've probably heard of Docker IO/webit as the right image to use for that application. So for your purposes, just the fact that they have an account at Docker/webit networks is exactly what you want. And if Docker somehow signs a delegation or signs the artifact as this is the artifact that belongs to Docker IO/webit networks, that's a useful signature. It might still be malicious, but it's the image that you wanted.
Yeah, it's the one that's on the repository anyway.
Yeah, my own thought here is that I'm kind of leaning against having this as a scenario if we're talking about we want to wait for Docker Hub to sign everything, just because that gets to be very registry specific. We're saying, you know, here's something a registry vendor can do, and I don't think we want to include that in our definition here. That's more Docker Hub to decide if and how they want to do that. The only thing that would make sense to me is if we want to say there needs to be a way to have a chain of trust, and then however people implement that, they implement it any way they want to. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out how to define the scenario a little better. But for right now, I'm still not 100% following it, depending on how we define this.
Yeah, maybe we can focus on the client side. Like the client should be able to verify a chain of trust from a registry. Going back to
if we can
the
say it's a
trust
chain of trust from a vendor, I think we'd be more comfortable. Like the chain of trust from a registry shouldn't, like registries are just storage buckets, right? Just think of that content is constantly moving. I want to be able to verify the content regardless of where it currently is.
Yeah, so maybe the scenario.
Yeah, I was going to say what we're getting at is that then the scenario is saying you can trust any point in that chain. And so you could say, I trust the very top level of everything, or I trust just this one developer that signed just this one repo. And it's up to the client to decide where they want to put their trust in that model.
That makes sense. So kind of focusing on the client side of the scenario.
It's a client side.
Wanted to add a few points there.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So I kind of agree with Brandon. If we define a mechanism of how you'll define trust policy stores, etc., and how validation takes place, this scenario seems kind of duplicate or external to what Notary V2 will solve. The example for what we said with Docker, in that case, like you're distributing Notary V2 with some preset trusted keys. That's just how Notary V2 is configured. And I think that's a very specific example. And the part regarding Docker kind of certifying images, I think there are multiple ways to do that. You may not want to rely to like always go through Docker, or your images may not be on Docker registry. The other way to do it would be to sign with a publicly trusted certificate. So you can trust it if you trust the CA, public CA which issued it. And even in that case, you have to bootstrap the trust yourself by configuring it. And I think the only special case that we are talking about is somebody like Docker can pre-populate this trust store and distribute a Notary client, or Docker bundled along with Notary, any of those options.
Yeah, that was kind of the model we were talking about. I think it's been a little while, but we were saying when Docker ships their client that comes with Docker desktop or whatever, they can include their certificates that way of just pre-populating it. That would be a vendor specific.
Because you're using the Docker Inc. client. It's probably good here to differentiate Docker Inc. versus the generic Docker. Like if I'm using Scopio or something, some other client tool, or actually I'll Containerd. Like I'm running Containerd in my host, my Docker client pulled it, but if I tell Kubernetes to run it, Kubernetes doesn't have anything to do with my Docker client. So I'd have to configure Kubernetes with some public keys to say it would be allowed to run it. And obviously it has to go through some kind of open gatekeeper kind of thing, whatever. I'm hand waving what the policy management is. But the Docker client, the Docker Inc. client would trust, some amount of content that Docker says they feel like you should trust. But if I pull something from Brandon's registry.io, that's completely out of band from that. And we have not yet decided or even recommended, how do I digitally, electronically, through clients, automatically get the key for Brandon or something. Right now, we're saying that we're hand waving. It's a total manual configuration at this point. I don't think that's the best answer, but it's better than everything's trusted.
But just parallels to the rest of the ecosystem. When you look at web browsers, Chrome, Firefox, they ship with a default set of certificates out there, and so any client that we have this implementing Notary, the Notary spec won't provide it, but anybody that ships their own client for it might ship their own certificate list.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I know we're running out of time.
Time check. We got 5 minutes left.
Yeah, so I will work on updating this scenario to focus more on the key chain part, and then let people decide how they get that trust themselves, probably shipping with whatever. And then if folks have time on their own this week to review scenario 12, or we can get to it next week and go over that. But I want to give the last 5 minutes away. Sorry.
Just a quick action, Marina. Like I know this is a little too granular, maybe too granular, but just in the spirit of getting some stuff merged, if you want to literally make a PR for just 10, I think we agree that that's fine. And then we could move past it. Like just delete it from this PR, create a new PR for PR10 and away we go. And then we'll continue to build on it.
That's a good idea. I'll work on that and the other one today, just so we can get some stuff merged in this week. Because that would be great. Yeah.
All right, Melinda, you got the last one.
I'll try to keep it short. So I think after the kind of the next steps are, I haven't submitted PRs for some of the docs that we have been working on. I think over the last month or so, we have reviewed the hack doc for each of them here. So I'll submit the PRs for those. And the next set of items are more of kind of high-level design docs. And I think trust policy and trust stores is what I'm planning to look at next. And also take a stab at threat model. I think there's already some work on threat model. I saw a PR. I'm going to kind of try to extend that. I think there's limited content in there. We need to expand on those. And I also want to highlight that just the way I'm thinking about it. We'll highlight multiple threads, but I want folks to be aware that like we are doing this in a phase by phase basis. So we may have like a RC1 which does not address all threats and may address a subset of threats. So we should kind of go in with that process of the threat model should be kind of expansive. It can list all of the things, but I want to kind of cap to whatever set we are currently trying to solve. Because what I want to avoid during the design discussions is if we try to solve every threat that's there in the threat model, I want to avoid that. I want to have common understanding on these are the things that are most important and are technically feasible in this timeline. And this is what we'll attack first. Does that sound good? Okay, and I think after that, some of the next set of items that I think work needs to be done is, one is kind of extensibility. We are thinking about this in a few different ways, how the actual key management, verification, revocation checks will work. And we know of some mechanisms to do it. Not all mechanisms are perfect. But I want to write up something about extensibility and see what people feel about it in terms of like, what are the kind of plumbing points in this whole framework where we can say, I can do revocation check currently using CRLs, but if I have a better mechanism, and for example, AWS as a cloud service provider has other internal mechanisms that work better than CRLs. Like, how can we plug different mechanisms in when there are better mechanisms available in the environment? That's kind of the
baseline that you can extend.
Yeah, and being able to do that without having to go through another round of kind of spec building. Like if we can agree on some principles there that any solution needs to comply to this interface, provide these set of capabilities, and then you can plug that in.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the challenges of relying on those existing technologies. Because I know that in the CA world, there's still active discussion about CRLs and the best ways to handle or not use or user not user handle or whatever those. And so we would definitely get involved in that from using them.
Cool. That's kind of a heads up. I also wanted to make sure folks in the working group are aware, like if there are any conflicts, like for example, I worked on the revocation doc without knowing there was already a PR about it. Also wanted to avoid that. Cool.
I think we do want to get back to doing the PR process in, off the GitHub stuff. I mean, that was Marina's point. That's a good point. I think we had to do some quick iterations on in Hack, but let's try to move back to GitHub. But the other thing, just there's a piece that what Melinda was kind of referring to is there's a time element of this. And that is, we are trying to split this into a phased approach that we really feel it was important before the executive order thing came out. It's just even more important that we have to have a signing solution this fall. And we know when something's time, back to the triangle, time, resources, and quality. Quality is something we'll never give up on, but time, features, resources. So we're going to be time-based with quality, and that means we won't get all features for this fall, but we're not going to declare, here's the 1.0 thing. It's like we're going to ship something this fall that will have a scope set of things that not everybody will be super comfortable with, but will be comfortable enough. And we will iterate on it after the fall. We'll continue to iterate, but we'll use that for a fall release because people get locked in holiday lockdowns. There's a whole bunch of conversations there. And we will have another release that we'll do, hopefully in the spring, that will be more feature driven than time driven. So that's part of what you're seeing bubble up. But I try to relay that. If you look at the project board in the Notary project, I started putting something there to try to outline that as well. So I'm hoping that will help with people's angst on why are we not doing this? How could we ship something without this? Because it's not that we're not going to eventually ship it. It's just what we think we need to solve for now versus what we'll solve next.
Yeah, real quick, because I know we're over time. So to Melinda's question there of do we already have anything for extendability? I don't think we've had anything on the Notary side for that one. The only thing I can think of is on the OCI side, where we're talking about how we could potentially extend on the registry. And I think, Steve, you might have been involved in some of those of how they wanted to find like a path with a certain prefix, something like that. That's the only thing I'm aware of. And so otherwise, when we're getting into the Notary APIs and stuff we're doing over here, I don't think we have anything on our side.
Okay.
We did capture a requirement that has to be extensible. For instance, key management must be extendable so that cloud providers can provide their key. We don't want somebody to go to a cloud provider that they're using AWS Key Vault or Azure Key Vault or HashiCorp Key Vault on-prem, and they can't use it because somehow we've locked this into some Notary V2 key management. We've said that has to be extensible. And I think part of what Melin's kind of getting at is the revocation needs to have some kind of extensibility into it as well. So I think
there are multiple pieces. Yeah, that's what we'll cover. Kind of look at the overall pieces of this and call out where we need to have extensibility.
All right. Till next week.
Sweet.
All right. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
folks.
Thanks.
I'll have some notes in there.
Thanks, everyone.